Hello, I'm Dr. David Rosensweet, and you've tuned in to I Wonder Doctor Live. It's 1 o'clock Eastern Time in the United States, and it's a time when I like to answer the questions that you email to us or that you call in. Those of you who call in, you always get the highest priority, and the number to call is 888-502-8886. That's 888-502-8886. And I'd like to open today with something that took me about 30 years to figure out in working with patients on a day-to-day basis. And it was primarily that medicine wasn't as complex as I thought it was, but it had this glitch in it that no matter what the diagnosis someone had, it came down to 90% of it, 95% of it was, could they make changes in their life? And it didn't matter how well or cleverly or intelligibly I spelled out the changes that I thought would be beneficial for them to make that would stop the illness process, that reverse the illness process. It really came down to, for them, what could they actually integrate into their life? What could they actually do? I emphasize them because I'm a human being. I have my own healing process. So it's very personal to me about what can I actually implement that I know is good for me into my daily life. And so in the last decade, for sure, every session that I've ever had with a patient really came down to this. Could I identify just one thing? A phrase that I picked up from Rick Hansen, just an amazing psychologist and human being who I'm mentioning his name because you could have access to him on the internet and so much of his wisdom. And he phrased things in terms of just one thing. Can I just identify one thing? Because if I could leave a consultation with a patient having made it clear of just one thing, if they could change, then what would happen the next time I saw them, if we chose correctly, they could implement that one thing and they would have, number one, the satisfaction that, hey, I can do something positive for myself that makes sense to me. And that opened the gateway to the next thing. So, just one thing. For example, let's say that you realize that you have an addiction to chocolate and you're doing a chocolate cake, a fudge bar, whatever it is, and that they add up. And you sit down and we determine, because you've got prediabetes, for example, or diabetes, that it's really important to reduce the number of simple carbohydrates of sweets in your diet. Oh yeah, common sense. And what do? Do I say, oh, I've got it all figured out for you, patient. Just eliminate all sweets from your diet and you're going to roll back that diabetes? No, not the right thing for me to say, because that may not be implementable. But if the patient and I can identify, well, I'm eating chocolate every day, in some form or another, piece of chocolate cake, a little fudge bar, a little gluten-free fudge bar, yeah, big difference. Fine that it's gluten-free, but it's still fudge. And we come up with, do you think you could eliminate and have one day a week where you weren't eating any chocolate? And maybe that's too much. Then it's one day every other week. We really try to identify something that they believe that, you know what, I could do that. And that's what we choose. That's the one thing we choose. And let's say that they decide to eliminate chocolate one full day a week. And in 3 weeks, when we got back together, I'd ask them how they were doing. And more times than not, they can say, I did it, doc. And they feel the internal satisfaction that they're actually able to implement something into their very busy and full and challenging life. Then I come up with the next thing. Let's take it down to 2 days. What do you think? Well, when you add up these little successes over the course of a year and then 5 years, oh my God, it's compounding. And by 5 years, you've implemented so many good things for your health, and just as crucial, by 3 months, 6 months, or at most a year, my patients would start to feel the difference. And they get the greatness of now they're walking 5 days a week, or they're going to the YMCA or the gym 3 days a week, and they've reduced chocolate. Well, after a year, you're down to 0. Now, everyone's feeling better, and you get to know it and feel it, and that's powerfully motivating, let me tell you. So let's pause for a moment and see if you can identify just one thing that you suspect that if you could implement it, and you're not pushing yourself to the point of making it impractical to implement, can you identify that one thing? I'm going to do that too. I'm going to tell you what mine is. Did you come up with it? I'll tell you what mine was. I want to add 1 extra glass of water a week to my pure water intake. If I do that, I'm going to get it down to daily, a glass of water a day, and in a year, my health is going to be better. I'm going to feel that. That's going to translate into more energy, more clarity of thought, more vitality. I know enough about those kind of changes that I can pretty much guarantee that's going to help me. So whatever yours was, try it out. See if you've identified something that you can actually implement. Keep it on the forefront of your choice, your daily choice pattern. Because I promise you, if you can increase your energy and increase your health, you're going to love it. It gets more and more meaningful every year that passes. And you're going to have a success, and you will have prioritized something that's the gateway to more fun, more love. That's what you want, more family, whatever really touches your heart. You're going to have the energy and the clarity to do it. So just one thing. And now our call-in number is 888-502-8886. And I'm going to turn to the questions that you've sent in through iwonderdoctor.com into Ask the Doc. And here is a question from Anders in Spokane, Washington. I've just been diagnosed with diabetes type 2. My uncle had diabetes and they ended up amputating his toes. Please tell me that this is not inevitable. No, let me rephrase that. Don't get my hopes up falsely. If it's true, I'd rather know now. Don't kid around. If I can avoid it, then tell me how. Oh my, I love this type of question, because here you are, you've been faced with a possibility of you've been diagnosed with diabetes type 2, and it can seem like such a mystery and so daunting. And how did that happen? And it came out of the blue. Well, anyone who has studied diabetes or anything deeply knows that it didn't come out of the blue, that it took decades and decades for that to develop. And it wasn't so much that it, quote, ran in your family. It's, well, why did it run in your family? Because there was a genetic propensity to have challenge with, for example, simple carbohydrates, excessive simple carbohydrates. And it turns out, if you had never challenged yourself with simple carbohydrates or an excessive response to stress, which has similar pathways, you wouldn't have developed diabetes type 2, just because your uncle had it or how many family members had it. If you treat your genes properly, they're more designed for health. So it is not inevitable. And here's the better news. You had a bunch of causes. And those causes, they added up, one molecule at a time, over the course of your whole life. And the good news is you can reverse those causes. And as far as diabetes goes, your ability to handle something called simple carbohydrates is currently limited. You know, when you were 10 years old, it was probably unlimited. You could eat 5 popsicles a day and 6 candy corns a day, and you'd never even notice it. But you would be provoking, you would be overusing one of the systems in our body that doesn't do well with overuse. Now, there's so much resilience to human health. You can overuse it, request too much of it for decades before it finally starts to go, oh, I can't keep up with these simple carbohydrates. So when you discover that, when you get enough blood tests that show you that, oh, there's challenge to my ability to handle those glucose excessive sweets, then you can roll it back, because one of the provocateurs that ultimately results in diabetes is too many simple carbohydrates, too many sweets. So one of your tasks is to roll back the simple carbohydrates. Here's the simple way to identify simple carbohydrates. If it's sweet, it's simple. So you sit down and you examine your diet. You can keep a diet diary, and then at the end of the week look at it and ask yourself, how many of those things that I ate are actually sweet? And then, I mean, this goes right along with today's theme. Your job is to eat less. And you don't have to do it overnight. You've got probably 3 to 5 years in which you can just improve, quiet down the over-challenge to that glucose regulating mechanism, and it'll quiet down, and you can reverse diabetes. Now, if your blood sugar is too high now, I recommend that you follow your physician's or your nurse practitioner's protocol of taking medications for it. For example, there's medications that can improve how you respond to insulin. And there's medications that can even go further than that to reduce the glucose load. So that buys you time. That allows you to implement and address the causes to diabetes, and that's your job, address those causes. Now, I want to add one complexity to it. I say simple carbohydrates are challenging anyone with diabetes. Yes, that is true. They're challenging the insulin mechanism. But there is no one anti-diabetic diet that works for all people. For example, Dr. Atkins, Robert Atkins, a real pioneer in the world of medicine, suggested that if we took out the simple carbohydrates, well, what are you going to do so that you won't be hungry? You have to add in protein and fats. That's not a problem. The Atkins diet and many variations of it, the latest is the ketone diet, has more protein and less fat. More protein, less carbohydrates, and it can also have more fat. Well, that's going to work for a lot of people, and especially people with prediabetes or diabetes, but it's not going to work for everybody, because there's some folks that are going to take the excessive protein and convert it to glucose. It's called gluconeogenesis. It happens. Well, what does that come down to? A core principle in medicine. We've got to individualize our own programs. And the very best way to do it is to test the foods in your diet. And the way to test it is with a home glucose monitor. Now, you do have to stick your finger, and you have to do it once or twice a day, but I'd recommend sticking your finger 2 hours after a meal. And you'll see what numbers each meal produces, and you're going to be able to identify the foods that don't raise your glucose really high, because that's the objective. You don't want to raise your blood glucose very high. So you may have to do some individualization there. It's like all diets don't work for all people. But the good news is you become the scientist of your own body. You discover the foods that are raising your blood glucose. If you don't want to go so far as to get the glucometer, which measures your blood glucose, then start with sweets and choose a way of reducing and eliminating those sweets that you can actually implement as I started off this whole show doing. That's it. It's reversible. That's the answer to your question. So many people do this. It's a project, but it's a project worth doing, because you're going to want to feel healthy, vital, and have all your toes well into however long you get to be on this planet. All right. Again, our number is, and excuse me, I'm going to rub my nose. Our number is, if you have a question to call in, it's 888-502-8886. And we also have a question here from Randall in Knoxville, Tennessee. Beautiful country. Right above the Smoky Mountain National Forest. Whew! One of the prettiest places on the planet Earth that I've seen. I have a cholesterol of 220 and I'm 42. They want to put me on cholesterol meds. My mom was put on cholesterol meds and had many side effects, including severe, and I mean severe, leg cramps. They tell me I could have a heart attack. What should I do, doctor? Well, the very first information around heart attack, because that's the bottom line, turned up cholesterol 50 years ago. They noticed that people had heart attacks, had cholesterol in their coronary arteries. And that began the whole concern about cholesterol. But I want to tell you, 50 years later, there is so much more known about coronary artery disease. And from my perspective, cholesterol is not the cause. And therefore, there is causes, and I certainly recommend our whole I Wonder Doctor series on diabetes, because it turns out that simple carbohydrates are the fast track to elevated cholesterol. And there's all kinds of different cholesterols. We have that in our video series. Subscribe to it on iwonderdoctor.com. The diabetes series and even the high blood pressure series has a significant amount on damage to the arteries. Because what we really want to do is we don't want to damage those arteries. Because from my perspective, cholesterol is primarily about the repair process that occurs when you damage an artery. So it's part of the inflammatory repair process. Ultimately, it's a scar. Ultimately, it's calcification. So what do you want to do? Well, high cholesterol, for one thing, can have a variety of causes that when someone who's really interested in this field, and I would recommend a functional medicine trained nurse practitioner or physician, they've taken a very significant interest in trying to get at the bottom of things. Well, what in the heck caused that cholesterol to go up to 220? Well, you can start with diet. Oh my goodness, there we go again. So many people have an elevated cholesterol because they're eating too many simple carbohydrates. Back to question number 1 from Anders from Spokane. And well, how do other people get elevated cholesterol? Well, it's not so much the elevated cholesterol. It's the kind of cholesterol that gets elevated and it's damage to the arteries. So you really want to get down to what in the heck damages arteries? What causes inflammation in the arteries? So there's a lot of knowledge about that. And there's some wonderfully simple and exquisite ways to test if you're at risk for causing excessive inflammation in your arteries. Now, sometimes elevated cholesterol is a signal that your thyroid hormone level is too low. When I was first trained by a world expert in thyroid at the University of Michigan, we didn't have any of the thyroid tests that were available today. And dear Dr. Matavinovich, may you rest in peace, you beautiful man. It was so inspiring and helpful to me. He said, every physician on earth should be able to diagnose hypothyroidism through a patient's symptoms and through the physical exam. And I am a firm believer in that. And any physician or nurse practitioner who goes into looking that up, you've already been trained in it, it's amazing how you can pick up on hypothyroidism. But Dr. Matavinovich said to me, listen, if you want to do blood tests, just take a cholesterol level, because people with hypothyroidism, which is so epidemic, silent, quiet, and especially functional hypothyroidism, where your thyroid numbers aren't way off the chart, but they are straining. He said measure the cholesterol. People who are hypothyroid are going to have an elevated cholesterol. They're not metabolizing it properly. So you really want to get at what helps metabolize cholesterol. So I wanted to give you a few insights into it. The place to begin with elevated cholesterol is to look at what could cause an elevation in that cholesterol and really what kind of cholesterol is getting elevated there, because there's some kind that don't damage the arteries. There's another kind, and it's oxidized LDL, just to give you a sneak preview about it, that can injure the arteries. But that's really about excessive oxidation and excessive inflammation. So that can be tied to diet. But you know, let's break it down to the cause of all physical abnormalities, every single one of them. And this should be very reassuring to you. And I want to tell you, it took me decades to get this. There's always causes. They always boil down to issues of improper nutrition, a dysfunctional response to stress, fight or flight, too much, toxicity, and or insufficient or even over exercising. It's all going to come down to that. Well, what's so great about that? Because you have control over your minute-to-minute day, and you can implement the changes that can reverse things that have gone awry in your body. The other thing that I'd like to say is, just in the world of nutrition, is there's nutritional supplements that can really help with this. And in fact, the original cholesterol-lowering medications were derived from red yeast rice. So just to give you an idea, there's so much known about this. There's so much that you can do about an elevated cholesterol. Get on the path and really try and investigate, do you have excessive inflammation in your body, and then address how to do that. Functional medicine, nurse practitioners and doctors, they're the gateway to because they've taken on that body of knowledge to try and get at those core causes. So there you are, up there, Randall in Knoxville, Tennessee. Take on the project. It is so worth the ultimate results. And that's it for today, folks. I'm Dr. David Rosensweet. You've tuned into I Wonder Doctor Live, and we'll see you next week, 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time in the United States, and we look forward to hearing from you and answering your questions. Always good to be with you.